Raced across the wooden footbridge, convinced I was being tracked by a silent presence hidden behind the towering limestone terraces. My pulse hammered, and each step on the slick walkway felt like stepping into a trap. My flashlight trembled in my grip, casting jittery beams against the sulfur-stained rocks. Fear drove me forward, yet a part of me needed to confirm what I'd glimpsed. There was an urgency I'd never known, a sense that this night would reveal a dark secret I couldn't ignore. My name is Patrick Driscoll, and this happened to me back in 2009 in Mammoth Hot Springs at Yellowstone National Park. I drove up from Idaho after hearing about the famous terraces that formed white and orange shelves against a steaming backdrop. I'd always loved road trips, so I took off on a Friday morning, determined to see the mesmerizing limestone structures and experience Yellowstone after the tourists had thinned out for the season. When I arrived, the place felt surreal, rising steam, ancient formations, and a persistent smell that left an acidic taste in the air. I walked the main trails in the afternoon, snapping photos, reading the informational signs about how the terraces formed over thousands of years through calcium carbonate deposits. There were only a few people around, mostly retirees with big cameras and a couple of park staff who reminded me to stick to the marked pathways. I followed their instructions at first, but after dinner at a small nearby cafe, I returned to the park entrance. I wanted a glimpse of those terraces under moonlight, hoping it would be an otherworldly sight. A lone ranger gave me a concerned look when I told him my plan, but he let me go, saying I should be back before midnight. I promised him I wouldn't wander off the designated boardwalk. The night felt hushed. The hiss of steam vents and the bubbling of hot water were the only noises around. My flashlight cut through the darkness. Mammoth Hot Springs looked like a giant sculpture in the gloom, with steam drifting over layered rock. I felt a sense of awe and caution. This land was as beautiful as it was unpredictable. I trailed the boardwalk that wound up to the higher terraces, mindful of weak spots. Every few steps, I stopped to admire the moonlit formations. But a prickling sense of unease followed me. I told myself it was just the late hour. The wind whipped up the steam at odd angles, and faint echoes carried across the terrace edges. I had no reason to panic. Still, I couldn't shake a growing suspicion that I wasn't alone. Once or twice, I thought I heard a short scraping noise, like claws against rock, but then the sound vanished. I'd sweep my flashlight around, seeing nothing but shadows and the faint shimmer of thermal pools. I tried to brush off my fear and pressed on. Eventually, I reached a part of the walkway that forked. One path led downhill to the main viewing platform. The other seemed to loop around a portion that had been roped off with a makeshift sign reading "under maintenance." Maybe it was under repair, or maybe a section was too fragile for visitors. Curiosity got the better of me, so I stepped over the rope. I told myself I'd just take a quick look, then head back. The boards creaked with my every step. The smell of minerals intensified. The path meandered along the side of a large limestone deposit, stained brown from decades of mineral runoff. At the far end of the deposit, I noticed a faint glow, like a reflection of the moon on a wet surface. I followed it, heart pounding, until I reached a small set of steps that led down to a darker section of rock. That's where I saw footprints. They looked human at first glance, but the spacing and shape seemed off. I crouched down and ran my fingers along the print. The outline was elongated, with toes that looked sharper than normal. It sent a chill through my chest. Then I heard the scraping noise again, closer this time. It made my stomach twist. I glanced up and swept the flashlight around. At first, there was nothing but chalky ledges. Then I spotted movement behind a jagged column of rock. I froze. A tall shape rose slowly, revealing a long, curved back coated with sparse patches of coarse, dark hair. Its arms hung low, the elbows seeming to bend backward in a way that looked uncomfortable, as though the bones had grown wrong. The head was narrow, and when it tilted, I saw a glint of reflection from its eyes. I staggered back, nearly dropping the flashlight. It moved with an odd, sidestepping motion, as though judging me. I tried to steady my breath. My mind raced. A part of me wanted to run, but I feared that would provoke a chase. Another part was so shocked that I couldn't budge. My flashlight beam trembled across the creature's torso, revealing mottled skin that looked raw in places. its ribs pressed against its hide, suggesting it was starving or ill. A harsh hiss escaped its throat, and that snapped me back to reality. I spun around and ran, ignoring the creaking boards, ignoring the possibility that the walkway might collapse. All I knew was that I had to reach the main area with the lights and possibly other people. I vaulted over the rope that had warned me not to enter in the first place, my heart slamming against my chest. The boardwalk curved downward, lit faintly by a ranger station security light in the distance. Behind me, I heard a wet slapping of limbs against the walkway. I dared not look back. My lungs burned, and I almost tripped on my shoelace. Ahead, I could see the main path. With a last burst of speed, I left the roped-off loop and found myself near a sign describing the travertine formations. Relief washed over me for an instant, until I realized the entire area was vacant. Everyone else had gone. The footsteps behind me stopped. I slowed, breath ragged, then shone my flashlight back up the path. An emptiness stretched across the boards. The walkway was bare except for drifting steam. I strained my ears but heard only the steady drip of hot water from a nearby formation. That's when the station light above me flickered. In that strobe-like glow, I caught a glimpse of it crawling along the limestone. It had shifted to the side, clinging to the rocky surface as if climbing a vertical wall. I forced myself to keep going, scanning for any route down to the parking area. I broke into a sprint again, ignoring the sudden pain in my side. The creature slid across a ledge overhead, sending loose pebbles rolling toward me. They struck the boardwalk with soft taps, each one a grim reminder that it was nearly on top of me. I tried to keep track of its shape, but the steam and darkness played tricks on my eyes. At the end of the boardwalk, I saw a small flight of wooden steps that descended to a gravel path. If I reached that path, I could make a beeline to my car. I bounded down the steps. Halfway, my foot slipped, and I pitched forward onto my hands. The flashlight skittered across the gravel, flickering out. I swore under my breath, scrambling to recover it. In the dim glow of the overhead light, I saw the creature descend behind me. Its elongated arms gripped the wooden railing, claws biting into the timber. It moved closer, head cocked as if studying me. I stumbled to my feet, grabbed the flashlight, and sprinted along the gravel path. I heard the thing drop onto the gravel behind me with a sickening thud. My eyes locked onto a dim silhouette of my parked SUV. Relief surged through me. I fumbled in my pocket for the key, nearly dropping it in my panic. My thighs burned from running, but I pushed forward. I yanked the driver's door open, dove in, and yanked it shut. My hands shook as I jammed the key into the ignition. The headlights flared, illuminating the path. I expected to see the creature charging me. Instead, I caught sight of it off to the side, crouching at the edge of the lot. It was partially behind a twisted juniper bush, eyes flickering in the beam of my headlights. There was something terribly human about the way it tilted its head, as if deciding whether to rush me or retreat. I reversed out of the parking space with tires skidding on gravel, then spun the wheel and tore out onto the main road. My palms were sweaty on the steering wheel, my heart racing in my ears. As I sped toward the park exit, I thought about alerting the rangers, but part of me was sure they'd never believe it. Another part of me felt certain that even if they did, there was little they could do. Still, I decided to try calling the ranger station once I reached a safe spot. I drove until I found an open convenience store just outside the park boundary. I parked in a bright corner of the lot, gathered my nerve, and called the ranger office. A tired-sounding ranger answered. I started describing a large unidentified animal near Mammoth Hot Springs. She politely asked for more details, but my explanations sounded ridiculous even to me. She said they'd check the area and encouraged me to come in if I was injured. I said I was fine, hung up, and locked my doors. My mind replayed its leathery skin and that sideways motion. Eventually, I managed to calm down enough to drive to a small motel. I tried to sleep but kept seeing those footprints, hearing that hiss. By morning, I was exhausted. I thought about heading back to see if the ranger had found anything. Yet I couldn't bring myself to do it. I fueled up and drove home instead, half expecting to see a shadow in my rearview mirror the entire way. I never told many people about that night. A few friends heard a watered-down version, I got spooked in the dark, saw an odd shape on the terraces. They usually laughed it off. That's for the best. I'm sure some rational explanation exists for what I saw. But I know how real it felt, how my pulse nearly burst when it locked eyes with me from that ledge. I don't think I'll ever volunteer for nighttime hikes in hidden corners of Yellowstone again. I learned enough. I drove out of that park wishing I could forget, but I know I can't. And that's all there is. I heard the shrieks echo across the lodge's walls, and my heart pounded like it might break free. There was no time to think. I sprinted down the hallway, stepping over scattered chairs and trying not to trip on the spilled luggage. A frantic voice hissed my name from behind, but I couldn't stop. There was a shape at the end of the corridor. It blocked the only exit. The stench of old rot grew stronger. Everything felt very wrong. My name is Carl Devlin, and this happened to me back in 2007 in Grant Village at Yellowstone. I had planned a quick escape from my job in Bozeman, hoping for a day of fishing on the lake and a night at the lodge. A friend of mine named Howard came along, excited for any excuse to get out of the office. We arrived early, stashed our gear, and let the day unfold without hurry. The trouble started around noon when I spoke with a park worker who warned us that people had been disappearing from campsites near the water. He mentioned they'd posted notices at the ranger station, but Howard and I joked that it was probably a rumor meant to keep tourists from wandering too far. We laughed it off because we had never heard anything official. We followed the footpath down to a small dock, determined to test our fishing rods. Howard had a habit of telling off-color jokes at the worst moments, but I found his nonsense comforting. He rattled on about everything from office gossip to how he wanted to buy a speedboat. We took turns teasing each other about who'd catch more trout. The sun felt warm on my arms, and the glimmer on the water made me think that maybe all the talk about vanishings was just scuttlebutt. We fished until late afternoon with no luck. Then I spotted a single silhouette further along the shore. It looked like a person stooped over in the distance, though the shape was strange, taller than a man should be and oddly thin. Howard tried to wave, but there was no response. The figure turned and disappeared behind some large rocks. I felt a weird twinge in my gut, like a quiet alarm that tells you something is off, but we brushed it away. We told ourselves maybe it was another hiker minding their own business. We carried our rods back to the lodge, where we had booked an overnight stay. The building stood near the tree line, with a small reception area leading to a cluster of rooms. We checked in, dropped our gear, and tried to relax. There was a small cafeteria off the main lobby, so we grabbed an early dinner. That's when a park ranger came in, looking rattled. His name tag read Walters. He demanded that the receptionist lock the doors. Said there'd been a report of frantic screams from the direction of the lakeshore. Howard glanced at me, eyebrows raised. A woman at a nearby table muttered that something terrible had happened near the water. Walters told everyone to stay inside. We were told to sit tight until he and another ranger made their rounds. It wasn't a request. He looked serious, and we didn't want to argue. The lodge had a dim hallway lined with vending machines and old paintings of geysers. Howard and I retreated there to talk things over. He tried to break the tension by making fun of how seriously Walters had spoken. But I noticed he kept rubbing his hands together. He does that when he's nervous. Despite his jokes, I could see the worry in his eyes. An hour later, Walters and another ranger named Franklin returned, faces white as sheets. They said a camper had been dragged away into the trees, and all they'd found were signs of a struggle by the lakeshore. The few guests inside the lodge fell silent. The reality of the rumor sank in. Something was roaming out there, and we had no clue what it was. We decided to gather in the main lounge area by the reception desk, comforted by the presence of others. The rangers urged everyone to keep the doors locked and not wander off. Howard and I settled on a battered old couch near the vending machines. He tried to watch a little TV, but the reception was poor. I paced across the lobby, checking the windows. It was just after dusk by then. The place felt claustrophobic, lit by flickering bulbs that cast odd shadows on the floor. Suddenly, an elderly man who'd been standing at the entrance gasped. I rushed to his side. He pointed outside, but I couldn't see much. For a few seconds, I caught a glimpse of a tall outline moving near the lodge's corner. It vanished behind a row of parked cars. Then I heard a sharp thud on the wall. It sounded like someone striking it with heavy force. The windows rattled. Walters shouted for everyone to stay low and keep out of sight. I ducked behind the reception counter, pulse hammering. Howard crouched next to me. He whispered, "What do we do if it gets in?" I had no answer. Moments later, a scraping noise came from the building's rear door. A desk clerk, trembling, insisted she'd locked all the exits. Walters told us to remain calm. He approached the hallway, flashlight in hand, and signaled that Franklin should follow. They vanished down the corridor. I heard muffled footsteps, then a crash. Another scream. This time it was Walters, and it cut off fast. Something pounded against the back door. The doorknob rattled as though forced by a powerful hand. I felt a spike of dread shoot through my spine, and I grabbed Howard's arm. We both stared at the hallway where the Rangers had gone. I could hardly breathe. The next sound was a long, scraping drag. Then nothing. A few of us tried to check if we could escape through the front. The elderly man said he'd attempt to get to his car. We unlocked the entrance. He sprinted out into the darkness. He made it about 10 yards before letting out a terrible shout. It stopped as fast as it started. I'm not sure what happened, but we knew we had to seal the door again. That's when the lights flickered. The generator must have been failing. The desk clerk scrambled to find a fuse box. Another man, shaking but determined, tried to help her. Howard grabbed a small fire axe from an emergency cabinet and pressed it into my hands. "Keep this," he said in a trembling voice. Then he found a metal rod from somewhere and held it tight. We inched down the corridor to see if we could find Walters. The walls felt too close, and each step echoed like an accusation. I stared at old pictures of park animals that hung askew on the walls, as though even they sensed the panic. By the time we reached the end of the corridor, we saw scattered luggage on the floor. A flashlight rolled in slow circles, casting beams of light that danced around the door. No sign of Walters or Franklin. Then we noticed the door was cracked open, leading to a storage area. I saw faint drag marks. Our minds filled in the rest. We retreated. That was when I heard that screech, like twisted metal and raw force combined. My chest seized up, and I froze. Howard grabbed my shoulder. "We can't stay here," he said. We ran back to the lobby. A half-dozen people stood in the flickering light, eyes wide with terror. We huddled together, trying to figure out a plan. The windows rattled again. I braced for more pounding, but it didn't come. When a sudden crash shook the supply closet, we all jumped. A door near us slammed open, and the desk clerk staggered out, her hair tangled across her face. She tried to form words but only managed a frantic gesture. Then something yanked her backward with a jerk. She vanished into the gloom. I only caught a glimpse of it, tall, lean limbs, an elongated snout with patches of bristly hair, and a muscular torso. It moved unnaturally fast. I heard a strangled yelp, then wet snapping. I gripped the axe. Howard gasped and looked away. We backed against the main entrance, fumbling for the lock. A shaky man next to me fumbled the keys, but we managed to yank the door open. Another crash behind us. The shape thundered down the hallway, bounding with impossible strides. Chairs went flying. Howard shouted, "Move!" I bolted outside, he right behind me. The ground was cold under my feet as we dashed toward the lodge's edge. I heard more screams behind me. We couldn't save them. We just kept running. We made it to the parking lot, only to realize we didn't have the keys to Howard's sedan. They were in our room, and I refused to go back inside. A woman crouched behind a pickup truck and waved us over. Her face was streaked with tears. She said she had a car but was missing her husband. Another loud crash echoed from the lodge's lobby. Glass shattered. I heard shouting, then silence. The woman gripped the truck side mirror, shaking like a leaf. She asked if we'd seen her husband. I said no. We spotted her car. It was a small SUV parked 2 rows away. We made a dash for it. Howard tried to keep the woman calm. I felt my chest tightening with every step. We reached her car, and she rummaged through her pockets. The keys clattered to the ground. Her hands shook so hard she could barely pick them up. Then, from behind a parked van, that shape rose. It paused, turned its head, and fixed its eyes on us. Even in the dim light, I could see the glint of savage intent. Its shoulders were broad, with tufts of dark fur matted in odd patterns. "Start the engine," Howard yelled. The woman stabbed the key into the lock. I gripped the axe, though I had no illusions it would do me much good. Her door opened. She leaped inside and unlocked the back. Howard jumped in. I tossed the axe onto the back seat, scrambled in after it, and slammed the door. The shape sprinted toward us in long strides. The woman fumbled the key into the ignition. The engine coughed. For a moment, I thought it would fail. Then it roared to life. She tore out of the lot, tires squealing, the shape close enough that I swore I heard its breath. We sped past the ranger station, past empty tents, past the sign that said exit. We kept driving until we reached a main road that led out of the park. Nobody spoke for a long time. Howard stared at the floor, hugging the metal rod. The woman clutched the wheel, knuckles white. I felt shame for not doing more to help those we left behind. Yet I knew we'd have likely joined them if we'd stayed. I never found out what happened to Walters or the others who vanished that night. When we finally reached another town, we stumbled into a small motel. The woman tried to call the authorities, and Howard and I paced in the parking lot, numb and shaking. I remember leaning against a flickering porch light, trying to steady my heart. It felt like we'd run 1,000 miles. Before dawn, Howard and I quietly parted ways with the woman. She had family to call, and we had no words left. I never returned to Grant Village. The next morning, I drove back to my apartment in Bozeman. Howard didn't show up to work for a week. When he did, he wouldn't speak of it, and I didn't press him. I still think about that day. I think about how quickly life can unravel. There's a silence in my mind where details should be, and I wonder if I've locked them away to keep myself sane. All I know is that I'm still here, and I can't bring myself to open that door again. I heard the heavy thud of footsteps and realized we weren't alone, that we'd stumbled into a hidden threat deep within the steaming terrain. My pulse skyrocketed as I glanced over my shoulder. Shapes moved between the mineral-stained rocks, and each sound told me we'd uncovered a nightmare far worse than any myth. Turning back seemed impossible. Going forward felt equally dangerous. Still, I needed answers, and I had no choice but to push on before this terror swallowed us whole. My name is Brandon Lee, and this happened back in 2012 at Norris Geyser Basin in Yellowstone National Park. It was supposed to be a quick day trip with my cousin, Jerry. We were weekend thrill-seekers who loved exploring lesser-known parts of the park. Jerry had read that Norris Geyser Basin had more active thermal features than anywhere else in Yellowstone. He told me about dormant pathways off the established boardwalks. Local chatter said certain areas were roped off not just for safety but because of mysterious incidents, vague stories about hikers who vanished without a trace. We convinced ourselves it was just rumor. A patch of trees around the basin was rumored to be no-go territory. Jerry and I took that as an invitation. We left our car near the main lot and ventured past the official trail. Steam rose in thin plumes around us, carrying that sharp sulfur smell. My eyes watered when the wind shifted. Jerry chuckled. "Well, this is the real Yellowstone, huh?" I tried to laugh back, but my nerves were already on edge. Nothing felt quite right. Even the air crackled around us, like it was charged with static. We pressed on, stepping across damp ground that sometimes sank underfoot. Once or twice, we nearly slid into murky pools that gurgled with scorching water. After an hour, we reached a secluded patch of twisted pines. The land sloped in a strange way, forming a shallow valley. Between the trees, we noticed scattered bones. Not big ones, maybe from small animals. Yet the sheer quantity was unsettling. Jerry bent down and whispered, "Something's been dragging kills here." His tone had changed from adventurous to concerned. I looked around and realized how silent the place was. No birds, No squirrels, just the hiss of distant geysers. Jerry and I should have left right then, but we kept going out of morbid curiosity. The thermal vents grew larger, and the ground was littered with unusual footprints, wide, uneven depressions that didn't match any shoe or animal track I'd seen before. They looped around, crisscrossing as if searching for something. Jerry pointed to a fresh mark near a vent. It was damp. Whatever made it was close. We followed those tracks until they led to a small clearing rimmed by stunted trees. At the center stood a cluster of rocks, all stained with pale residue from the geyser runoff. Jerry stepped on a broken tree branch, and the sound echoed in the hush. That was when we heard a scraping noise, like nails dragging on stone. I felt my stomach tighten. Jerry whispered, "Keep your voice low." I nodded. A man emerged from behind the biggest rock, stumbling toward us. His face was pale, and his clothes were torn. He looked around wildly, as if he didn't recognize where he was. Jerry and I rushed forward. I asked, "Are you hurt?" He mumbled nonsense, eyes darting. Then he grabbed Jerry's shoulders and repeated, "Don't move, it sees movement." His panic was contagious, and I found myself glancing frantically at the rocks and trees, not sure what he meant. Jerry pulled a water bottle from his pack and offered it. The man took a trembling sip. He introduced himself as Kyle, a wildlife photographer. Between gasps, he told us he'd been trailing a rare moose when he stumbled across something feeding near a hot spring. He spoke of a tall silhouette with elongated arms and a hardened back that seemed to crackle in the geothermal haze. He said it looked so foreign that at first he thought it had to be some deformed animal. Then, as it moved, he realized it was observing him. By the time he tried to flee, it was on him in a flash. He claimed he'd been hiding among these rocks for hours. Jerry said, "That's impossible," but he shot me a look that was anything but certain. Something about Kyle's story rang too authentic to be a hoax. We helped him up, and he insisted we quietly head back. But a strange hush fell over the clearing. It felt like a presence was near, watching us. Jerry motioned for us to follow, and we walked in a tight group, making as little noise as possible. Barely a minute passed before we heard a scratching behind us. Jerry turned, and I glimpsed a spindly figure slipping between the trees. It looked half again our height, with elongated limbs covered in segments of dull, grayish plating. The top of its head spread outward like a fan, ridged with spines. I froze. Jerry tried to whisper, but the words stuck in his throat. Kyle's eyes went wide with terror, and he murmured, "That's it." We stepped backward, but the thing advanced in an uncanny shuffle, keeping itself half hidden behind the tree line. Steam drifted between us, making it hard to track its exact position. I realized we were close to a scalding vent, and one wrong step could sink us into near boiling mud. The figure seemed to understand the terrain better than we did. It circled slowly, forcing us toward a narrow corridor of safe ground. Jerry tried to lead us away, but a scalding geyser vent blocked that path. Panic surged through me as I realized we were being cornered. Kyle's breath came in quick bursts. He clutched Jerry's arm. "We can't outrun it," he said, voice shaking. I tried to recall which direction would lead us back to the official trail. Everything looked the same in the swirling steam. The figure slid behind a cluster of dead pines and then, in a single lunge, came within a stone's throw of us. It used its elongated arms to scrape against a rock, producing an abrasive screech that made me clamp my hands over my ears. Jerry reached into his backpack for anything that might serve as a weapon. All he had was a small hatchet, meant for cutting kindling. He held it up, uncertain. Kyle looked around for a rock or a branch, but the ground here was covered in mineral crust that crumbled underfoot. I felt absurdly helpless, stuck between a half-frozen stance and a frantic urge to run. Then that thing pivoted, revealing a torso with overlapping plates. It raised an arm, exposing a spiky forearm that flickered in the steam. My knees nearly buckled, but Jerry exhaled, "We have to move," and we dashed sideways. The figure reacted instantly, blocking our path with a wild leap. Jerry swung his hatchet, missing by inches. Kyle let out a desperate shout as the thing swiped at him, cutting the air with a horrid rasp. My heart pounded, and I felt adrenaline surge through me, like this was the final moment to decide everything. I spotted a faint path that sloped downhill. "Down there!" I yelled, grabbing Kyle's jacket and tugging him. Jerry followed, hatchet still raised. We raced down the slope, our boots sliding on the wet earth. Behind us, branches snapped under something heavy. The figure gave chase, but the terrain turned treacherous, with boiling pools on either side. Our best hope was to navigate carefully while it might slip or slow. We skirted the edge of a wide pool where the water bubbled and spat. Jerry nearly fell in when the bank collapsed. I pulled him back, my fingers burning from the hot mud splatter. Kyle stumbled and cried out, twisting his ankle, but managed to keep going. Steam from the pools billowed around us, forming a hazy curtain. We hurried through it, coughing and blinking stinging tears from our eyes. The figure's scraping steps echoed behind, methodical and unrelenting. At last, we burst onto a firmer trail. A warped sign stood in the distance, cautioning hikers about the danger of leaving the boardwalk. We practically sprinted for it. The thing behind us gained speed. I heard a clack of its plated limbs scraping against a boulder. My mind raced with images of it slamming into us, dragging us back into the scorching mud. Jerry shouted, "Split up. It can't chase all of us." Kyle yelled back, "No, stay together." I had no idea which plan made sense. Fear drowned my thoughts. Suddenly, the figure charged in a blur. Its tall shape lunged forward, and I glimpsed the ridged plating twisting across its broad shoulders. Jerry swung the hatchet in a desperate arc. Sparks flew when it struck the plating, and the thing jerked with a sound like iron scraping. It staggered back, giving us a second to run. We sprinted off, hearts hammering. I nearly slipped on a slick patch of ground. Kyle grabbed my arm, steadying me. Jerry was already ahead, motioning for us to keep going. We found a partly collapsed wooden barrier. Beyond it was a main walkway with railings and a sign explaining the thermal features. A couple stood there, cameras in hand. They turned, startled by our frantic appearance. Jerry waved them off, "Get out of here." They stared, wide-eyed. Kyle yelled, "Now!" They seemed to notice something behind us and bolted toward the visitor center. The figure emerged on the path behind us, paused, then jerked away to vanish behind steaming rocks. It was as though it refused to be seen by too many eyes at once. Jerry and I exchanged a terrified look. We realized we had a chance to reach safety. We hurried after the fleeing couple. My lungs burned, and every muscle in my body felt strained. By the time we reached the visitor center, Jerry dropped onto a bench, panting. Kyle collapsed against the wall, clutching his ankle. A park ranger came over, concerned. "What's going on?" he asked, and we launched into a rushed explanation. The couple backed us up, saying they saw something impossibly big dart behind the steam vents. The ranger took notes, face creased with disbelief. He said, "All right, I'll notify the others. Let's calm down inside." A second ranger arrived, guiding us to an office in the back. I noticed a small poster listing local wildlife. It didn't show anything close to what we'd encountered. While we tried to relay every detail, the rangers exchanged looks. They asked if we'd spent too long near the hot springs, maybe inhaled too much sulfur. We insisted we saw tracks, that Kyle was attacked, and that some hidden predator was out there. One ranger sighed, "We'll run a patrol and see if we find anything." The other gave us a form to fill out with contact information. Jerry wanted to lead them back to the clearing, but the rangers insisted we wait. Kyle pleaded for them to hurry. They nodded, yet they seemed doubtful. We stayed at the station for hours, sipping bad coffee and replaying the events in hushed voices. Near evening, the patrol returned with nothing. No footprints, no sign of our chase. The only thing they confirmed was an area of collapsed ground and a dangerous thermal zone near the dead pines. Jerry and I looked at Kyle. Kyle just shook his head, traumatized. The rangers apologized, citing how quickly the land can shift around geyser basins. They suggested we might have interpreted natural formations as something else. We knew better, but we had no way to prove it. They drove us back to our car, told us to be careful, and that was that. We parted ways with Kyle at the parking lot, exchanging phone numbers. Jerry and I never made that kind of trip again. He said he felt we'd stepped over a line that day, finding something we weren't meant to see. I still dream about the scraping noise and that tall shape twisting in the steam. Whenever I think about going back to Yellowstone, my stomach knots up. Jerry doesn't mention the basin at all, which might be for the best. I used to believe every corner of Yellowstone was mapped and understood. Now I know there are places that hide secrets beyond our understanding. We made it out in one piece, and that's enough reason to let this memory stay buried. But sometimes, I catch myself imagining that spine silhouette drifting through the swirling vapors, forever stalking whoever dares to wander off the safe path. We walked away lucky, yet I'm certain our footsteps never fully disappeared from that place. I guess this has to be where my account ends. And I'll leave it at that. Footsteps thundered behind me, heavy and unyielding, as though a giant was pounding across the earth. My breath hitched, and my legs felt on the verge of collapse. Every instinct told me to keep moving. I heard a muffled snarl, then a sudden snap of branches to my left. Instinct drove me to duck, praying I'd stay one step ahead of the horror and lethal chase behind me. All I knew was that I'd uncovered something that begged to stay hidden. My name is Tom Ridley, and this happened to me back in 2008 at Lamar Valley in Yellowstone National Park. It started early in the morning when I decided to explore a lesser-known patch of backcountry. My coworker, Mark, thought I was crazy for wanting to leave the standard trails behind, but he had a spark of curiosity that always lit up whenever I did something reckless. He said, "You drag me out here at dawn, and all I've got is a half-stale energy bar. If a bison doesn't trample me, hunger will." His grin was half genuine, half nervous. We stepped off the main path without a word to the rangers because we assumed we'd be back before sundown. For a while, it was just endless grasslands rolling into the distance, dotted with streams and stands of pine. We joked about how city folks would pay good money to stay in a cramped motel when they could come out here and feel the wind on their faces for free. The sun climbed higher, setting off those golden hues in the valley, and I felt at peace. There's a sense of freedom in that landscape you can't find anywhere else. By noon, we broke for a quick snack on a rise overlooking the river. I teased Mark for wearing brand new boots. He complained about his blisters and how he'd spent his savings on that fancy leather, only to have it chafe all morning. We could see a handful of bison far in the distance, and they looked like slow-moving specks. Nothing about the day felt sinister, but something in the back of my mind kept nagging at me. I brushed it aside as nerves. After lunch, we pressed on. The plan was simple: track the river into a part of the valley where hardly anyone went. We wanted to see if we could spot any unusual wildlife or maybe a hidden hot spring. Mark carried a cheap camera, which he swore could capture every detail. He must have snapped 100 shots of wildflowers, rotting logs, and the occasional hawk overhead. Around mid-afternoon, he froze mid-click and said, "Hey, you smell that?" I sniffed the air and caught a faint stench like spoiled meat. It came from beyond the thicket of shrubs. We decided to investigate, partly out of curiosity and partly to reassure ourselves it was nothing alarming. We found a cluster of bones scattered on the damp ground, some with dried sinew still clinging. It looked like an elk's remains. The carcass had been shredded, though not in the way you'd expect from a wolf or any typical scavenger. Mark turned pale and said, "We need to get out of here." I'd seen kills in the wild before, but this felt off. The arrangement was messy, the bones far apart, and not a single track around them. I told Mark we should push on carefully, see if there was any sign of a predator's den. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but he followed. We moved deeper into the brush, careful not to make noise. Something about that stench lingered, growing more pungent. My eyes scanned the ground for footprints or claw marks. I saw none. It was as if the animal had been ripped apart in midair. My heart started to pound. I tried to quell the rising panic by reminding myself that nature can be brutal, and we were simply stumbling onto the aftermath of some large scavenger's feast. Within the next hour, we reached a narrow channel where water trickled over smooth stones. I dipped my hand in to cool off. The reflection that greeted me in the shallow pool looked uneasy. Mark said, "You got a weird vibe, man." I just nodded. We should have turned back, but a strange determination kept me moving forward. Maybe I wanted to prove to Mark and to myself that I could handle the wild. We wound around a rocky bend where tall grasses brushed our legs. Suddenly, I heard a snap behind us. We spun around, expecting some large animal, perhaps a bison or a deer. The valley had gone silent. No birds, no breeze rustling the grass, nothing but the sound of our own breathing. Mark and I exchanged a glance. He mouthed, "We should leave." I agreed, though I didn't speak it aloud. We started retracing our steps, but the environment began to feel unfamiliar, like we had crossed into a place not marked on any map. Trees loomed taller, and the undergrowth seemed thicker than before. My compass, which I kept clipped to my belt, spun erratically, as though we stood in a magnetic anomaly. Mark's camera jammed. He fiddled with it, cursing under his breath. I told him to forget the camera and focus on getting out. Then I saw a blur of motion along the tree line. It was big, with a lean silhouette that reminded me of a twisted wolf, but it stood upright for a moment, shoulders tense, as though scanning us from a distance. Mark grabbed my arm and muttered, "What is that?" I had no answer. I only knew it watched us. That's when I noticed the stench again, stronger than before, hitting my nostrils like a wave of decay. We picked up our pace, heading toward the river, hoping it would lead us back. I glanced over my shoulder and caught sight of that thing gliding between the pines, covering ground in unnaturally quick bursts. The shape carried a narrow head with jaws that seemed to hinge too far. It looked starved yet muscular, each limb jointed in a way that gave me a burst of nausea just to see it move. Mark nearly tripped, and I had to steady him before he fell. We ran. The sunlight was dipping behind the ridges, and the shadows stretched across the valley. My lungs felt like they were on fire, and my legs ached, but nothing mattered except escaping whatever had decided we were trespassing. I heard twigs snap behind me and glimpsed the shape darting closer. Mark swung his walking stick at the undergrowth behind us, half hoping to scare it off. His face was contorted in raw panic, yet he forced a nervous laugh. "We should have gone to a nice beach instead," he said. I almost giggled, though no part of me found this funny. It was just raw adrenaline and dread colliding in my chest. We ducked under a fallen log and pushed through a bramble patch that tore at our clothes. My mind raced with images of that scattered elk skeleton. Mark started wheezing, and he begged me to slow down. I refused. I had a flashlight in my backpack, but rummaging for it seemed insane. I had to keep my eyes on the darkening trail. Another clatter of branches tore through the silence, so close that I felt a surge of terror shoot through my body. We stumbled into a clearing dotted with stunted trees and tall, dry grass. The shape rushed us from the side, a flash of dark hide and an exposed row of sharp teeth. Mark shouted, then lashed out with his stick. It snapped on impact. I smelled something foul, like rotting leaves and rancid meat, then felt a sharp pain across my arm. I couldn't see exactly what happened, only that the beast moved with shocking speed. I fell backward, slamming onto the ground, as Mark grabbed my collar and dragged me away from its snapping jaws. We scrambled up and sprinted in a blind dash, our breath ragged. My mind was a blur. How could anything move that fast, remain that silent until it chose to strike? We crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping our faces. I felt warm blood trickling down my arm, but I refused to stop. The valley grew darker by the second, and the terror of losing sunlight made me feel cornered, as though the entire landscape had turned against us. Our last hope was to find the main trail or a ranger station. Mark spotted a faint path curving around a rocky bluff. We bolted for it, but that presence followed, weaving in and out of the fading light. I caught another glimpse of its face, a long snout, lips pulled back, revealing a row of pointed teeth. It made no noise, only a series of abrupt motions that suggested it hunted with cunning. We finally reached a series of wooden markers that indicated a maintained path. Up ahead, a small bridge crossed a shallow creek. Mark and I plunged forward, gasping for air, half laughing at the sheer absurdity of our predicament. My vision swam with exhaustion. I heard a rustle behind us, then a thud against the trunk of a nearby pine. The thing had fallen back for the moment, but I sensed it wasn't finished. We sprinted over the bridge. The world was a blur of silhouettes in half-light. Mark said, "Where's the ranger station?" My voice cracked when I answered, "Maybe half a mile more." We clung to that hope. Each step felt like stepping on shattered glass, and my arm burned from where I'd been wounded. At last, I spotted the faint glow of artificial light ahead. We forced our legs to keep going. Fear roared in my mind, pushing me onward. We burst into a small clearing near the ranger outpost, panting, drenched in sweat, and disheveled. A single lamp glowed above the door. I collapsed to my knees, Mark beside me. We scanned the darkness behind us but saw only a tangle of trees. Whatever attacked us had vanished into the gloom. The door to the station opened, and a wide-eyed ranger stepped out. He asked if we'd gotten lost. Mark managed a choked laugh and muttered, "You have no idea." The ranger helped me inside, patched up my arm, and urged us to rest on a wooden bench. I tried to explain what we'd encountered. He listened with a patient frown but looked unconvinced. Mark's face was ashen, and his hands shook. We spent the night there, jumping at every tiny sound in the walls. I didn't sleep. My mind kept flashing to the elk's bones and that lean shape prowling between trees. In the first light of morning, we left Yellowstone under the ranger's advice to seek medical attention. He offered to do a quick search of the area, but I begged him not to go alone. He insisted he'd be fine. Mark and I got in my pickup truck and drove without speaking. When we hit the main road, Mark whispered, "Next time, let's just fish by the river." I nodded, too tired to argue. The day we spent in Lamar Valley changed how I look at wild places forever. The memory still haunts me. I suppose it always will. That was the last time I ventured off any marked trail. I think I learned enough about what can hide beyond the safety of familiar ground. I'm done testing the boundaries. I'd rather wander where the map is clear. I don't plan on going back. I stumbled over a jagged rock, knees stinging as I landed hard. My ears rang with a pounding that matched my frantic heartbeat. A shape moved behind the towering pines, silent yet menacing. I didn't dare look back. Every breath hurt. My thoughts spun with the dread of what might happen if I stopped. Nobody told me how real terror could grip a man's soul like this. I had to keep going, or I knew I'd vanish without a trace. My name is Owen Jacobs, and this happened to me back in 2005 at Mammoth Hot Springs in Yellowstone National Park. The day began with a sense of excitement. I'd been restless for weeks, stuck in a dull routine in Idaho Falls, so my buddy Doug and I decided to drive out for a quick adventure. We parked near Mammoth Hot Springs, hoping to explore the terraces, snap a few photos, and head home by sundown. I liked the craggy looks of the area, all that mineral buildup shining in the sun. The air smelled of sulfur and hot stone, and I remember joking with Doug that my boots were going to stink for days if I slipped in a pool. Neither of us expected trouble. Doug was cracking jokes about the tourists wearing brand new hiking gear they'd obviously bought the day before. I was busy fiddling with my camera, trying to capture the swirling steam that rose from the pale, tiered formations. "We're pros," Doug said, giving me a nudge. "We know better than to wander off." He snickered. "Then again, I suppose we could see more if we do." That was Doug. He loved poking around places we weren't supposed to go. I let him lead the way onto a narrow path that ran through a patch of scrubby pines. The official boardwalks had ended, but Doug insisted the best photo ops were just around the bend. Our map was old, so we weren't even sure if this was an official trail or a patch of land rangers had forgotten to fence off. The ground felt unstable in places, and my boots sank into warm, damp soil. Every now and then, steam vents hissed at us. I teased Doug that if the ground opened up, his phone would be the first thing to melt. He made an exaggerated bow. "Owen, if we disappear into some hot spring, promise you'll tell the newspapers I died heroically." I snorted. "Sure, I'll spin a grand tale about how you saved my life from a geyser." We laughed and plowed ahead. I was confident we'd turn back once the mineral formations got too steep or the brush got too thick. But then we heard a strange crash, followed by a wet, snapping sound that made both of us freeze. Doug raised his hand as if telling me to keep quiet. My pulse quickened. Maybe it was a fallen tree? Or an elk rummaging around? We moved forward slowly. I thought we'd find a bison or something big rummaging in the undergrowth. Instead, I saw patches of fur strewn across the ground, along with a glistening dark spatter that made my stomach tighten. Doug took one glance and muttered, "We should back up." I might have listened if I hadn't noticed what lay deeper in the brush. Some large, twisted shape was hunched over a carcass. The shape jerked once, then again. It seemed to tear at the remains with a deliberate sort of hunger, as if stripping every shred of flesh in quick, efficient motions. I swallowed hard and nudged Doug to confirm he saw the same thing. The shape was covered in patchy white hair, but the shoulders and arms looked too angular, and the limbs were too long for any animal I knew. A faint hiss cut through the air. My heart thudded. Doug, always the braver one, or the more foolhardy, took a single step closer. That was when the shape jerked its head up, and in the corner of my eye, I caught sight of its face. The features were triangular, like a narrow skull pressing against tight skin. The eyes bulged black against its pale fur. Two short, bony horns curled from its forehead. Something about the way its jaws clamped down on that carcass made my gut twist. I grabbed Doug's arm, intending to drag him back, but in the quiet, my foot scraped a stone. The shape spun around. A ragged clacking sound escaped its throat. I remember going cold. Doug whipped around and sprinted without a word. I followed, though my mind lagged, struggling to process how something like that could exist. The forest wasn't thick, but it felt claustrophobic. My lungs burned. I wanted to shout, "Doug, wait up," except my voice refused to come out. We heard thrashing behind us. Branches snapped, and I caught glimpses of that pale figure weaving between the trees. I forced my legs to move faster. Doug was in front, nearly tripping over roots and rocks. We reached a wide clearing near the geothermal vents. Thick steam rose around us. The earth was slick and crumbly, and I skidded, nearly toppling over. The ground gurgled with hot water just a few feet away. Doug stopped in front of a shallow hole where boiling water bubbled. He spun around, eyes wide. "We can't cross here," he said. Between gasps. "We gotta go around the ridge." "No time," I hissed. "We'll slip if we're not careful." He checked behind him. "I'll risk it." We darted around the steaming hole, hugging the stable ground. For a moment, I thought we'd lost that thing. Then I heard a high-pitched grunt, somewhere behind the dense cloud of steam. I felt my stomach lurch. It was close, so close that I could almost sense the vibration of its movement. Doug and I pressed ourselves against the rocks, hearts pounding. We locked eyes. I knew we had to keep moving, so we slipped past another vent, ignoring the stench of sulfur thick enough to sting our noses. I saw a wooden sign half buried in dirt and realized we were near an abandoned service path. We dashed to it, hoping it would lead us back to the main boardwalk. Then, to our horror, we heard the scrabbling of nails on stone behind us. I didn't dare look. I sprinted, ignoring the cramped building in my side. Doug let out a trembling laugh as we rounded a bend and spotted a battered ranger cabin. "We can hide in there," he yelled. We threw ourselves at the door. Doug turned the knob, but it was locked. He rattled the door in panic. Through the dusty window, I saw old shelves and a desk. No occupant. No help. My heart hammered. I searched around for anything to pry the door open, and Doug scrambled for a loose rock. Then that wretched shape came into view on the path, no more than 30 yards away. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, with spindly arms and a chest that tapered down to a narrow waist. Matted white fur clung to patches of its shoulders, and the 2 horns on its head curved backward. Its face was so pale it almost looked bleached, with those bug-like eyes fixed on us. The mouth quivered, wet with fresh gore. My hands shook. Doug jammed a rock into the door's hinge, but it did little more than chip the old wood. Without warning, it charged. I shouted at Doug, "Forget the door. Let's go." We sprinted again, this time heading downhill, following the path that hugged a slope near the springs. My breath felt ragged, and my vision blurred with panic. The thing behind us let out a shrill squeal, a noise that jabbed at my nerves. My feet flew over the loose gravel, a step from losing balance. Doug stumbled once, and I caught him by the elbow before he pitched face first into the slope. We reached a narrow footbridge that spanned a shallow ravine. The boards creaked under us. Doug shouted, "Go, go," as if I needed the encouragement. We dashed across, and the boards trembled again. I glanced back long enough to see that pale figure pause at the start of the bridge, as if judging whether it could support its weight. Then it set one long limb onto the boards. The bridge groaned. With a crack, the wood gave way under its stride. It plunged halfway through, stuck in the splintered planks. I wanted to feel relieved, but the sight of it snarling and thrashing made my blood run cold. It clawed at the boards, ripping them apart. I turned, grabbing Doug's shirt, and together we ran. We forced ourselves to keep going until we glimpsed the official boardwalk. Park visitors stood around, snapping photos of the steaming terraces. They noticed us rushing toward them, soaked in sweat, eyes wild. A couple of them asked if we needed help, but I couldn't form a sentence, just pointed back toward the place we'd come from. Doug choked out something about a dangerous animal. A man wearing a National Park Service patch started asking questions. Doug and I both talked over each other, describing the same hideous shape and the shredded remains it had been feeding on. The ranger's expression turned grim. He said we should follow him to a bigger station near the main road. We didn't argue. At the station, a pair of rangers asked for every detail. They looked concerned but also skeptical. I heard one murmur that maybe it was a mountain lion with mange or something diseased. Doug stared at the ranger as if the man were clueless. I shook my head. It wasn't like anything I've seen, I insisted. The rangers exchanged glances but jotted our testimony down. They sent out a couple of armed staff to check the area. Doug wanted to wait, but my nerves were shot, and I just wanted to leave. The rangers insisted we speak to a higher-up in the morning, but we refused. We hopped in our truck, hearts still pounding. We didn't say much as we drove off. The memory of that pale-faced nightmare pulling itself free from the broken boards haunted me every time I blinked. Doug tried to lighten the mood once, muttering, "Man, talk about a near-death scenario. If I'd known we'd end the day like that, I'd have stayed in bed." I managed a short laugh, but my hands were locked on the steering wheel, knuckles white. We left Yellowstone that evening, determined never to poke around restricted terrain again. I kept replaying the sight of that battered carcass and the twisted posture of whatever had torn into it. There's no simple way to explain what we encountered. I don't have any proof beyond the nightmares that still jolt me awake sometimes. But I'm certain of what I saw that day, even if no one else believes me. I was there. I heard its shrill cry. I felt the ground quake beneath its weight. I'd rather spend the rest of my life forgetting it, but I can't. Not completely. Even so, I'm here, telling you all this because it matters to me that someone else knows what lurks beyond those boardwalks. I can't say what it was or where it might be now. All I know is that I was lucky to walk away. I got home in one piece. Doug got home in one piece. But something in us changed along that hillside. We packed our gear and agreed to keep our mouths shut. After all, telling the world would bring more trouble than it's worth. Once you see that side of nature, you start wondering how safe the familiar paths really are. It's not a thought I enjoy, but it's one I can't shake off. I'm older now. I've told only a handful of people. If you ever visit Mammoth Hot Springs, stay on the official trail. If Doug were here, he'd say the same. After everything we went through, that's the best advice we can give. I never looked back at that collapsed footbridge when we drove away. I closed my eyes, pressed my hands against the wheel, and pretended I could leave it all behind. That night, I sat in my living room, half expecting to see a pale silhouette looming at my window. It never showed, and for that, I was grateful. All I've got left is a chill in my gut and the memory of that hideous face. That's enough for me. I doubt I'll ever go back.